10.3a leads us into the next step in completing the square. And in this case, we will start by reminding ourselves how we factor these perfect squares. So remember, if the first term is a perfect square and the last term is a perfect square, then it will probably factor to be a perfect square. Take the square root of the first one, take the square root of the last one, and bring down the sign in the middle. We can do the same thing on number 2. We do have a perfect square here and a perfect square here, so we get x and 3, and the sign in the middle always follows. Now those are called perfect squares, okay? Perfect squared trinomial. When we are completing the square, we are basically changing a polynomial into a perfect square so that we can use this method to factor it. So there are a couple steps you need to follow so that we can create a perfect square that we can factor. So let's practice those steps first, and then we'll show you how to use it through a problem. So we are looking at the left side here. We want to fill in this blank right here so that this becomes a trinomial that we can factor as a perfect square. Now if you notice, 7 is half of 14 here, and 3 is half of 6. 7 is also the square root of 49, 3 is the square root of 9. So there are some patterns going on here that we can use. And what we want to do is figure out what we need to do to this 8 to get this number over here. So what did we do to 14 to get 49? Well, if you take half of 14, you get 7. And then if you square 7, you get 49. So that's actually what we're going to do. The first step is to find half of the b term. So if the b term is 8, half of 8 would be 4. And then we want to square it. So 4 squared would be 16. That will go in the blank here. Now, when we do that, we've now created a perfect square. We take the square root of x squared to get x, take the square root of 16 to get 4, bring down the plus sign in the middle. The other thing we want to remember, since we're dealing with equations, if we add 16 to the left side of the equal sign, we have to automatically add 16 to both sides. So the third step is to be sure that you add it to both sides of the equation. If you don't do this step, then it will throw the whole equation off. So even if you do this wonderfully, you forget to add it to this side as well, you still won't get the correct answer. So we're going to just practice that a couple times. Here's your b term, 10. We take half of 10 and we square it. So half of 10 would be 5, and 5 squared is 25. You do not need to write this. You can do this in your head if you would like. And why do I keep ignoring the sign here? Well, it doesn't matter if I take half of negative 10 to get negative 5 or half of positive 10 to get 5. Because when I square it, it's always going to give us positive something. So you can ignore the sign for now and just look at the value of that number. Half of 10 is 5, 5 squared is 25. If we add 25 to the left side, we have to add 25 to the right side. And then this left side we can factor as a perfect square. Take the square root of x squared, take the square root of 25, and bring down the sign here. I want you to go ahead and try to do number 3 on your own. Follow the exact same steps, see if you can fill in the blanks. So go ahead and push pause. All right, let's see how you did. Half of 4 would be 2, and 2 squared would be 4. Now I didn't put the sign in here, but it's always positive. So we'll add 4 to this side and add 4 to this side. It will always be addition because whatever we square will always be a positive number. Then we can factor the left side, the square root of x squared, the square root of 4, and the sign in the middle. How'd you do? All right, let's see how we work it into a full equation. The steps are all written on the side here, so you can follow these on your homework if you need extra help. The first thing you want to do is create that blank in the C that we had above in those previous problems. So if you look at problem 4 here, we've got a 3 in the place that we need to fill. So it's called completing the square because we want to fill in that blank so we can make it into a square. So we want to create that blank. So we've got to move this constant to the other side. So we'll subtract 3 to move that to the other side. We get x squared minus 14x. Now put the blank in there. Plus blank equals negative 10 minus 3 would be negative 13. And remember, whatever we add to this side, we will automatically add to this side. So you might as well create a blank on both sides so that you don't forget to do that. Now when we fill in the C, remember we're just taking half of B and then squaring it. So that's the same steps that we did above. Half of 14 is 7. 7 squared is 49. If I add 49 to the left side, I have to add 49 to the right side. Now let's see how this whole problem finishes. This becomes a perfect square. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 49 is 7. Bring down the sign in the middle. But we do still have to complete this side in order to finish the rest of the problem. Negative 13 plus 49 is 36. Okay, so that's what we just did here, step 3. Factor the left side as a perfect square. That's what we did here. Now we can use yesterday's lesson, 10.3a, to solve for x. So we want to take the square root of both sides. Don't forget that we get 2 answers when we do that. So we take the square root of this side and the square root of this side. I'm going to bring it all the way down here. The square root of this would be x minus 7, because remember, the square and the square root will cancel each other out, and we get just x minus 7. When we take the square root of 36, remember, we do get 6, but we get 2 answers, so we also get negative 6. And then the last step, solve for the variable and put it in set notation. So we're going to add 7, but we have to add it to both of these answers. So we get x equals 6 plus 7, which is 13, negative 6 plus 7, which is 1. And those will be your 2 solutions, which will also be the place where the parabola crosses the x-axis at those 2 points. Let's move on to the back side. We'll try one more together. Let's jump to number 6, actually, and we have to make a little adjustment here. This should be an x and not a y. So in number 6, again, we've got this c there's a number there. We've got to get rid of that. So we move the negative 20 over by adding 20 so that we can create that blank in the c spot. X squared plus 16x plus blank equals 12 plus 20, which is 32, plus blank. Ooh, I'm sorry. All right, so we added 20 to both sides, then created the blank. 12 plus 20 is 32. Create the blank on this side. Now, we're going to take half the b and square it. Half the b and square it. Half of 16 is 8. 8 squared is 64. Now we've created this to be a perfect square. We've completed the blank so we can make it into a square. So we completed the square. Take the square root here, take the square root here, bring down the sign in the middle. 32 plus 64 will give us 96. Now we need to finish solving. So to undo this square, we take the square root of both sides. The square and the square root will cancel. You get x plus 8. Now, 96 is not a perfect squared number, so when we take the square root, we will get a decimal. And we're going to round this to hundredths place, 9.80 and negative 9.80. We want to solve for x, so just like we did before, subtract 8 here, subtract 8 from this guy, subtract 8 from this guy. These drop out. 9.8 minus 8 is 1.8. And negative 9.8 minus 8 is negative 17.80, if you want to put the 0 in there. So x such that x equals 1.80 and negative 17.80. Final thing I want to say here, let's suppose you have a problem that looks like this. completing the square gets very difficult if a is not equal to 1. So if you have a problem that you are asked to use completing the square and a does not equal 1, you want to get rid of that 5, but you can't just throw it out. What we could do is divide everything by 5. And so if we do that, go ahead and divide this by 5, this by 5, this by 5, and this by 5, which leaves us with x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Then you could complete the square by adding 6 to both sides and continue on to find your solutions. So completing the square is best and much simpler if a equals 1. You won't learn until Algebra 2 how to complete the square if a does not equal 1. So unless you can take out a GCM like we did here. So go ahead and try 5 and 6. I'll tell you what the answers are. 5 should come out to be 8 and -2. And 7, should come out to be 23.62 and 0.38. So give those a shot and see if you get those answers. And you can always rewind and check your work if you have any questions.